Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Galloway, and you may know I've just written a book about our guest, Sherry Lansing, who is and was one of the extraordinary pioneers in Hollywood. In 1980, she was named president of 20th Century Fox and became the first woman to shatter that glass ceiling. For the next 25 years, she was the most powerful woman in Hollywood, produced films like The Accused, Indecent Proposal, and especially Fatal Attraction. And then in 1992, she was named chairman of Paramount Pictures, where she greenlit films including Saving Private Ryan, Forrest Gump, Titanic, Braveheart, had an extraordinary 13-year run, and then chose to turn her back on it for a completely different life at the age of 60. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Stephen.
I want to go back to that moment in 1980, which was a turning point, in some ways more for women than for you. 20th Century Fox was in crisis. The regime that led it, that had famously made Star Wars, Turning Point, and a host of other movies, sort of a legendary Hollywood regime led by Alan Ladd Jr., had left in a bit of a huff. And they were searching for a production president who could turn them around. Why you?
I think it's because even though I was the first woman, I had literally worked my way up the studio system. I had started out at first I began as a math and English teacher in Watson, East LA, but then when I was able to finally get a job as an actress and realized that I really wanted to be behind the camera, I started reading scripts. And that is what you consider like an entry-level job. And then I literally worked my way up through every job within the studio system. Head of script readers, vice president, which meant that you got to work on the screenplays, not just select them. Then vice president of production, which meant you got to work on the movies. And the natural thing after that, senior vice president, and then the natural job, if it wasn't that I was a woman, was that you were the head of the studio. I was fortunate enough to work on 2 movies and guide them through their very beginning to the very successful end, Kramer versus Kramer and China Syndrome. And they were both kind of legendary movies, and they were more than successful movies. They were also movies that became part of the culture. And so in Hollywood, people determine, which is completely wrong, that you have some magic, that you know what you're doing. You know how to pick hits. And so I think because of that reason, they chose me to be the head of the studio. At the time, there had never been a woman before, and I think all of us, myself included, were stunned at the wave of media attention, because it actually was a logical progression. And I remember that Alan Herschel used to say, "I'm the Branch Rickey of the movie business."
He was the chairman of Fox.
He was the chairman, and he was like so proud. But the truth of the matter is, when I was offered the job, and I know it's hard to believe, I really hesitated. I really was not sure I wanted to do it, because I had loved working on Kramer versus Kramer and on the China Syndrome. And because I was the senior vice president of production, I really was almost like the executive producer in my head. I'm not sure in anybody else's head, but I almost was like that because I got to go to the set as much as I wanted. I got to work on the script with the writer and the director. I got to see the dailies, which is the film that's shot during the day. I was involved in the marketing, and I loved it. And so when I was ready to leave, assuming that I would never get another job besides senior vice president, because I actually said in Life magazine that there would never be a woman head of a studio in my lifetime, when I actually got that job and finished with those 2 movies, I decided I wanted to be a producer, which is the thing that's dearest to my heart. And I was in negotiations to be a producer at 20th Century Fox. And Alan Hirschfeld said, "Wait a minute, we want you to run the studio." And I hesitated. And I hesitated for, I think, a lot of really good reasons that have kind of been reasons that have guided me. First of all, I wasn't sure I'd like the job. Even though it had more status, I wasn't really sure that I personally would like it, because it was taking me one step away from the movies. One layer away. No longer would you be in every story meeting. No longer would you be able to wander to the set whenever you wanted. You would be part of a very wonderful job where you greenlit the pictures, but you would be part of a lot of bureaucracy as well, worrying about the commissary, worrying about how many parking places, worrying about the banks, all the things that are wonderful, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. I also was 35 years old and I was single, and I wanted an active personal life. I wanted to be able to have romance in my life. I wanted to be able to, I didn't really particularly want to get married, but I wanted to be able to have romance. I wanted to be able to have friends, girlfriends, male friends, whatever. And I knew that that job was going to consume my life. I knew that if I did that job, it wasn't, nor was senior vice president, but it wasn't something that you could leave the office at 6. You had to make choices. And I knew that I would be working 7 days a week, you know, till midnight every night, staggering to find time to work out, staggering to find time to have a personal life. And I really wasn't sure that that was worth it. A lot of people were trying to convince me to do it. And I remember one person said to me, just think of it this way, will you regret it if you don't do it? And the answer was yes. So all those things taken into account made me say yes. And I do not regret that I did it. It was a very smart, in hindsight, very good decision for my life, obviously, as well as for my career.
What about for your personal life? Could you have a personal, can somebody have a personal life and do a job like that?
It's hard. I mean, if we're really honest with one another. At a certain point in your life, you can do things sequentially. I know this is very un-PC to say, and I know it's not what people really want to hear me say, but I think, you know, what is a personal life? I mean, you get married, you have children, you have friends. You know, that's what a personal life, but people usually think of it. And for me, I didn't think I could be married, have children, and I don't mean married, let's just say have a partner in some way, you know, have children and run the studio. I don't think I could have done all three. So for me, I know that if I had had children while I was running Fox or Paramount, I would have always felt guilt. I would have always felt that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Do you know, that I should be at my kid's soccer game, but really I was supposed to be at a board meeting. And then when I was at the board meeting, I'd feel guilty that I wasn't with my husband. And then with my husband, I'd feel guilty. So this idea of having it all was impossible for me. But I'm not saying it is impossible for everybody. It's just my nature. So I'm very comfortable with the choices that I made. But I chose at that time in my life to put my work first because it was the only way that I could do my job. And in fact, the relationships that I had during that time, the romantic relationships that I had, suffered because of it. I don't regret any of it because I got very lucky at 46 and met the love of my life and got married, and I have 2 wonderful stepchildren, so it's almost like a fairy tale the way it all turned out. But at that time, I remember the men that I was dating or going with always saying to me, what do you have to be there for? I mean, you know, they can't shoot the movie without you. I mean, and so my enormous passion, which I had, my enormous consumption and consuming of work, working 7 days a week, basically, and I think you interviewed some of the people in the book. They basically say, I hated her job and that's why we're not together, you know? So, now, but I want to say something also. That was the world then, okay? That was a long time ago. That world has changed today. I mean, women, first of all, somebody asked me a question. If you had had a stay-at-home husband, or a husband whose work allowed him to stay at home, could you have had it all? And the answer is, of course, yes. You know, but that was. I mean, I'm 72 years old. We're talking like on another planet. You know, so it was a different world then, and I think that is very important to recognize. And you can also, therefore, have it all, depending on how you determine your job, what all is, whatever. So I had it all sequentially, I guess is the best way to put it. It's a long answer to the question. But
you landed at Fox, and you know, you'd come to Hollywood wanting to be an actress. Sherry starred opposite John Wayne in Rio Lobo, found out she hated acting, had psychosomatic pain as a result.
That's true.
Taught, in the toughest inner city schools. And through all this, you sort of manage to keep sort of fairly wide-eyed about things. And then you'll arrive in this political maelstrom where there's another executive who's secretly been promised he's going to be your boss. Marvin Davis buys the studio, and he's the 300-pound Texas oil man, summons his new studio chief and says, "I want to see Sherry Lansing." How eye-opening was that, and how did you navigate the politics?
So it's a great story, though, because I don't want to leave you with false impressions of anyone. So when Marvin Davis bought 20th Century Fox, he asked to see the head of the studio. And I walked into his office, and he said, no, I don't need any coffee now. And I said, no, I'm Sherry Lansing. And he said, "Oh, honey, I understand what the confusion was." He said, I want to see Sherry Lansing, the head of the studio. I said, "I'm Sherry Lansing, and I'm the head of the studio." Now, despite that, we had a great relationship. So I want to really be clear. Sometimes I think when I'm talking, people must think I'm coming from another planet, because the whole world has changed. When I left, there were more women running studios than men. So the whole world has changed, but it was a different world then. And so people had to adjust to it. The studio had a lot of political turmoil. Alan Hirschfeld had signed 2 contracts. One contract said that I could only report to him, and the other man, who had a job equal to me, said that I would report to him. So he wanted both of us, and he just did what was expedient at the time, but not particularly ethical. So we had a lot of political storms, and then there was a lot of pressure because I was the first woman. So I remember going to a dinner when a bunch of women were honoring me from Lear magazine, and this one woman got up, who I adore now, and she said, "You must succeed," and she started pointing her finger at me. And I remember that she was very feisty and short, and she was a great woman, and she kept saying, "You must succeed, because if you fail for all women." And I went, "Oh my God, I never thought of it that way." And so then Marlo Thomas was there, and she said, "Come on, guys, give her a break. Men just usually last 1 year in this job." And then everyone started laughing. So what do you do in a situation like that? Denial is your best friend in the whole world. So I just put my head down. I just did my job. I didn't let any of that noise bother me. I didn't let all the politics that were going on affect my ability. I didn't let what was supposed to be pressure. I just went, wait a minute, I'm just going to do my job. That's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to overwork, overprepare, overstudy, and I'm going to concentrate on the movies, and that's it. And actually, one of the salvations for my life has always been work. So whatever's going on, if I get outside of myself, and if I think about, in my case, the movies, and now in my 3rd chapter, philanthropy, whatever I'm working on, the world just disappears. And my problems disappear because I'm focused on something outside of myself. And so focusing on these movies that I loved, focusing on the people that I was working on them with, just meant, well, we'll succeed, we'll fail, there'll be politics going on all around, but I'm not going to let that distract me from doing what I love. And that's been a salvation for me in more ways than just politics. It's been a salvation for me. We all wake up days when we're depressed. We all wake up days when we have a loss of confidence or whatever, and we go, my God, how come that 12-year-old child is still with me? When will she go away? We all have that. But I find that if I just lie around and think about it, then I become paralyzed. But if I concentrate on the work, then my demons go away. And that's always been a salvation for me.
Where do the demons come from?
Well, that's a great question.
You knew I was going to go there, right?
No, I didn't. Stephen, who knows more about me, probably than any man other than my analyst when I went through therapy. And sometimes I think it's a close call. Always surprises me when he asks me questions. I guess some of your demons are genetic. You know, they say that there's an anxiety gene, and if there is, believe you me, I inherited it. You know, and then it's the way you're raised. And I had wonderful parents, but unfortunately, my father died when I was 9 and he was just 42. And he died, he suffered from heart disease. Today he would be, I think, healthy and alive. He'd have a bypass or something. But he had woken me in the middle of the night to go across my room to the porch because we didn't have air conditioning. And I said to him, "Oh, Dad, you woke me," and I think I yelled at him. And my mother says it didn't happen, but in my mind, I had incredible guilt. And I really didn't understand death because the rabbi said that I shouldn't go to the funeral. So in all honesty, I just thought he left our family because I was a bad girl. So I used to look for him in crowds. Like if I came into this room when I was 9, I'd look around and I'd say, I'm going to find my father and I'm going to bring him back because I love him. And it wasn't until many years later, you know, when I was in my teens, that I understood what death was. But I carried that guilt around and that sense of dread that at any time something bad could happen to you. Do you know?
And you still have that?
I have it enormously. I always think, you know, I always go to the worst place. Do you know, my girlfriend, and I see Mark here, my girlfriend Nadine and I, we call ourselves dead in a ditch girls. So if we can't find our husbands, you know, it never occurs to us they could be doing anything bad. We think they had a heart attack and they're dead in a ditch. We don't go to, you know, maybe they're late. If I can't find my son, dead in a ditch, where is he? So we call ourselves the dead in the ditch girls. We just go from A to Z. There's nothing in between. So I still have that, you know. And the other thing that happened that I think also caused me to be who I am is my mother escaped from Nazi Germany. And she was so it's a complex thing. She was my role model, and I'll explain to you why. But she also brought all those personality that somebody who had their whole life ripped away brings. So my mother could not express emotion. She was extraordinarily functional, but she believed that if you said nice things that God would come down and smite you. You know, there's an expression, poo, 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 don't say that. Don't say that because God is going to punish you if you say, congratulations on getting an A in your work, then the next time you'll get a D. Do you know? I mean, so she couldn't express it, and she couldn't really do anything but criticize me. That was just who she was, because if she said nice things, she believed, you know, God would smite her. She used to say an expression that I just remember to this day. If I woke up and I was in a really good mood, she'd say, sing before breakfast, cry before dinner. So it was that whole way of being raised. However, everybody is complex. Everybody's gray. Nobody is anything but that. And so there's that, and you go, oh my God, but here's the other. So my mother had more joy of life in a funny way, more zest for life. And she was my first role model. She was my first inspiration. And I think I learned everything from her by watching her. Because when my father died at 42, my mother was 32. She had 2 young children to support. She had come here from Germany. She had sold dresses, and then she got married, as was the common way at that time. And so these 2 men came in after my father passed away, and in the middle of her grief, I mean, it was like the 2nd or 3rd day, they said, Margot, you have nothing to worry about. My father had a small real estate business. They said, we will take over the business. They were the number 2 people. And we will run it for you, and we will take care of you and your family. And she looked at them with these steely eyes, and she said, no, you won't. You will teach me how to run the business, and I will take care of my family. That's a 32-year-old woman. And I heard that because I remember I was hiding, like on the staircase listening, who were these men coming in? And I learned from my mother never to be a victim, to be self-empowered, and that you could do anything by her actions. And I used to sit in the car next to her, and we used to go and collect the rent. And we continued to live a middle-class life, and she continued to take care of us. And she smiled again, and she fell in love again. And my second father, Norton Lansing, who I call my second father, even though he's not my biological father, we became a family again. And she used to have this expression, and I'm not quite sure what it means, but I still say it to my kids. She used to say, "Pull up your socks." Now I don't have any socks on today, but she'd say that, which meant get on with it. We have to. Life is precious. Pull up your socks. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. And she never felt sorry for herself. So,
do you ever feel sorry for yourself?
No.
Oh.
Not sorry for myself. That's a different thing. I think, no. That's a great question. I feel gratitude for my life. I feel blessed. I feel depressed, but that doesn't mean, and I feel anxious sometimes, but that's not sorry for yourself. Because even, you'd be nuts not to be depressed sometimes, you'd be nuts,
Especially these days, yes.
Well, yes, but I mean, but you feel depressed about something stupid. A movie doesn't work, you feel depressed. You don't want to get out of bed that morning. But I don't feel sorry for myself because, oh my God, all you have to do is look at the world and realize how lucky you are. And, okay, so the movie didn't work. Okay, so you failed at something. But in the scheme of things, you're the luckiest person. So depression and anxiety does not mean you feel sorry for yourself. And I don't suffer from depression much. I suffer from anxiety. Like, I worry, will the movie work? There's a great expression. I've worried about so many things in my life, and some of them actually came true. So it's like, no, I don't feel sorry for myself.
What did your mother say?
I feel empathy for people who have real problems. Real problems. And real problems are health, and real problems, are war. Those are real problems. The rest of this is all kind of nonsense.
Do you know that Woody Allen line? He said, "We create problems to avoid the real problems in life."
That's right. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And I have a lot of resiliency. So when I've experienced failure, which I've experienced as much as success, like my mother, like, pick up your socks. Okay, I've been feeling sorry for myself, but not feeling sorry for myself for 1 hour, and now I put it in balance and I move on. And I think it was Sumner Redstone who said this great line, success is not built on success, it's built on failure and picking yourself up and doing it again.
You're 21, you're already married, you get in a Mustang and leave Chicago for a place you've never been to, Los Angeles. Sherry and her husband knew so little about Hollywood that her husband was going to go to study medicine in San Francisco, thinking, well, it's California, how far can Hollywood be, You set out across the country and finally get this break opposite John Wayne for Howard Hughes. And now you're a star, but you hate it. Why? Howard Hawks.
Yeah, not Howard Hughes. Who knows what would have happened if Howard Hughes was a film director?
Let's talk about Howard Hughes anyway.
I never met him, so I don't know, but I've seen a lot of movies on him. So when I was growing up in Chicago, I used to love to go to the movies, and I used to look at this big screen, and all I saw was actors. And at the time that I was growing up, there weren't film schools. There wasn't a way to study film. And so what happened is I knew I wanted to be part of that world. They all looked so happy. They all looked so glamorous. It just looked wonderful. But whenever I told anybody that, they would kind of laugh at me. So I learned to keep my dreams a secret. And I told my husband-to-be, a man named Michael, who thrilled my parents because he was going to be a doctor, so everything was like glorious. And he said, okay, I believe in you, that sounds cool. And as you said, he said, well, I'm applying to UCSF. I said, that's great, that's close enough to Hollywood. He didn't get in, so he got into Cedars and we came here. And I taught school, and every day after school, I taught in Watson, East LA, which was my second passion, being a teacher or a social worker. Those are the two things I wanted to do. I would change my clothes, I would try and get a job. I was a very young girl. I had very little self-esteem. Maybe the word is no self-esteem is better. And I thought that acting would solve all my problems. I would feel better about myself. I would like myself better. I wouldn't be this insecure person filled with anxiety, and this would be the way out of everything. And then a strange thing happened. Thank God I was cast in this movie early, or I would still be trying to solve my problems that way, you know. But thank God, in a couple of years, I was cast in this film with John Wayne. And then a strange thing, as I said, happened. I would act, and I would get this incredible tension in my arms and legs, which I didn't understand what it was. And I wanted it to go away because it made it almost impossible to act because I was so tense. And then, on top of it all, I had no talent. I mean, I am the worst actress in the world. And so I didn't enjoy it. I honestly cannot be somebody other than myself, which is why I'm so in awe of actors, because they can be sitting here like this, and then someone says, oh, set, and they just burst into tears, or they start screaming at somebody. And I just thought, this is an amazing skill set that they have. But I also know how vulnerable you feel when you put your whole self out there. So I have respect and empathy for actors and awe. And so there I was, this terrible actress, and there I was feeling uncomfortable every day and realizing that this wasn't going to solve my problems. This wasn't going to fill me up. And, you know, to this day, I still get that. If I was, I think the word is inauthentic, I would get this tension in my arms and legs. So rather than trying to get it to go away, I now embrace it as a warning for something that's bothering me.
When have you felt inauthentic?
Well, mostly when I was acting.
But more recently, do you ever?
Well, sometimes, well, not now, because I won't do it, but sometimes people ask you, I mean, it's weird, it sounds funny, like to get up and say nice things about somebody that you don't like, and you're sitting there going, I get this thing, and I go, no, someone else should do it. But I can tell, you know, it's like, you know, like at these dinners.
We all want the name, Sherry, like, you know.
No, but at these dinners, you know, or something, or I don't do it anymore, you know. But I felt it during the acting time, and then I was suddenly a failed actress with tension in my arms and legs, and I was getting divorced. And so I knew I needed help, and I knew that I had almost no self-esteem, and that I needed to start realizing that the outside world could not fill me up. And so I think the smartest thing I've ever done was I went into therapy. And you know, they often refer to therapy as reparenting yourself. And so I started to see a therapist 3 times a week. And it's the greatest gift I ever gave myself, and I think I would not have the life I have today had I not done that, because I started to peel away those layers of self-doubt, self-hatred, whatever you want to say, and I guess reparent, you know, and that's not in any way blaming my mother or father, because they were great. I mean, and that changed my life forever. And so very quickly thereafter, you know, I stopped acting, and I got a job reading scripts for an incredible producer, a man named Ray Wagner. And I had an office that's not much bigger than this table, and I mean, I guess it is bigger than that table, but not much. But I remember when I went to that office and I started to read scripts, I felt like this is where I belonged. I felt like I'd come home, and I loved it. And that was really the change. That was really the beginning.
There are two things that really astonish people when they read the book. One is, here you are, you were for 25 years the most powerful woman in Hollywood. You ran 2 studios, you produced these films. They can't believe that in your late 20s you had no self-esteem. How do you go from that to that?
Well, I think therapy was for me the answer. And I don't think that this is the answer for everybody, do you know? And first of all, you need a good doctor, you know. But I think it can be a rabbi, it can be a priest, it can be your best friend, it can be whatever you want. It can be your partner. For me, that was what it was, because it gave me self-confidence, and it made me know where I belonged. You know, I wasn't, and honestly, I've never tried to fill myself from the outside ever since that time. I just did what felt good to me, you know. And, you know, it doesn't go away. You're always a work in progress. And every day, you know, you're a work in progress, and whatever, I said this when we came, you know, when we talked before, that 12-year-old, or in the case of me, my mother, they're still sitting on your shoulder. And my mother's still going, oh, I can't believe you did that, you know, whatever it is. But you have tools, and you know that how to overcome it. And I'll be honest, and Stephen, you know this, when Stephen decided to write this book on my life, and I always say, in a moment of weakness, I said yes, and it's been downhill ever since, because I had such anxiety about this book, because I didn't have any controls or approvals, and so Stephen and I would meet, and he would ask me these questions, and I would go, how'd you find out about that? How did you find out about this? And I went every day, and we'd meet usually on Saturday or Sunday. Monday, I had anxiety through the wazoo. On Tuesday, I was depressed, and on Wednesday, I just thought, maybe the book will never happen. Maybe something will go wrong. So not knowing, not having control was just terrifying. So I went back to talk to the analyst about it, and he would say, what's the worst that can happen? And then he'd listen and go, well, let's talk about that. You know, so I just want to say, it's good to go for refreshers, that's all.
What surprised you most when you read the book?
How difficult it was to get all the movies made that we did during my time at Paramount, and how many fights there were. I mean, I just was astonished, because denial is my best friend. And so when we would make a movie, and I think this is the way people survive, you know, there would be a lot of tension, and Stephen documents all of this in the book, a lot of fights, a lot of yelling and screaming and threatening and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to sue you, no, I'm going to sue you, whatever it was. But I don't remember it that way, because it turned out to be Braveheart. And so I just remember, oh, it was really nice, we made the movie, but that's not the truth. The truth is, and when you remind me, then of course I remembered every fight, and Stephen talked to everybody who was involved in the making of these movies, so they told the truth. And I'm just astonished at how difficult it was, and how the culture of running a studio is all about, you know, fights and battles, because everybody who's making the movie is incredibly passionate, and they want to make the best movie they can. So passionate people come together, and they're going to disagree, and you as the studio head have the final say. So that's normal, but what I remember is not the fights, but the end result, which is how you survive. But that culture is so normal, and I didn't remember it that way. I just remembered something that John Dolgen and I once...
Who ran Paramount with you?
Yes, and we once had... what happens is the picture comes out on a Friday night, and you get the gross for Friday, say about 10:15 at night. And you can predict what it'll do for the weekend, and most of the time you can predict what it'll do for the whole run of the picture. So that Friday night call is among the most important calls for a studio executive. And you're either elated or you're devastated. It's either one or the other. So we had a huge, huge, huge opening. I mean, we broke the records. I think it was on Mission Impossible, but it really doesn't make any difference what it was. We broke the record for that time. And John and I were on the phone, and it was like 10:15, and he said to me, "This is so great. This is so fantastic. We broke the record. Our summer's going to be great." And then after that, he said, "So how long do you think we'll be happy about this before someone calls us and, you know, tells us that they're walking off a movie, or we did this wrong or we did that wrong?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you think? Noon?" He said, 9:45 a.m. That was the truth.
Wow.
That's how much good time you get, you know.
I said that one of the things that surprised people when they read the book is that you'd been at such a low point and could build yourself up. And that was how tough you had to be. You know, we've broken some of the juicy stories on the Hollywood Reporter website, and there are lots. You know, Mel Gibson throwing an ashtray. Sherry says at a wall. Well, it was through a wall. You know, Angelina Jolie on drugs. I mean, Tom Cruise. All sorts of stories. But the one that I got a big reaction from was you arrive at Paramount. It's 1992, and there's hardly anything in the works. But one picture that is in the works is Wayne's World 2. And they're weeks away from production. And then a lawyer says to Sherry, "We have a problem," which is that the screenplay is a complete rip-off of another script. And you can't shoot it because we don't own the rights. This would have been a massive legal battle. And Sherry summons Mike Myers and his entourage to her office and sits down and says, what?
Ugh, I hate this story. See, Stephen uncovered every story about me that I'm not...
that you never want people to read.
I never want people to know. And so they're all there. Someone said to me, "How do you feel about the book?" I said, "Well, I've learned to embrace the book. It's very hard when someone writes about you, because how can you evaluate it?" I said, "And unfortunately, the things that I really hate are all true. So there's very little I can do." So I think in the book, one of the people described it as the Bataan Death March.
Right, yes.
So Mike Myers had consciously or unconsciously, I'll never know, plagiarized another movie. And so when we found that out, we had no choice but to bring him into the room, because the movie was supposed to start shooting in 6 weeks. Wayne's World, as you remember, was a giant movie, and Wayne's World 2 was our summer release. And so I obviously asked him how he, this is a terrible story.
Come on, tell us.
Asked him how he could have done this to us. And you describe him as sitting curled in a fetal position in the desk, and they were around in the couch. And then I said to him, "Look, you have to go in and write a new script, like today. And I don't care, you have like 2 weeks to write a new script, and that's it." And I said, "And if you don't do that," I said, "we have a team of lawyers who are outside of Stanley Jaffe's office, and we will sue you." I hate telling the story. "And we will take your house." And so I
We will take your effing house, I think was the...
Okay. "And then after we take your effing house, we will take everything else you own. And by the way, just leave now, and we will slide food under the door. Just go in there and stay there till you finish it." Now, I have to say this because it's not in the book. So what are you supposed to do in a situation like that? Do you know, he absolutely came into the meeting saying, "I will not rewrite a thing, and we won't do the movie, or you'll have to do it my way, and if you get sued, and an injunction to stop the movie, so what?" So my job, and what made it not traumatic for me, except reading it, and it seemed quite normal to me, and it seemed quite the right thing to do, was I have to protect the movie. I have to get that movie made, and I have to protect the bottom line. And I cannot just we had all sorts of sponsors. We had, people that had invested in the movie, and I can't remember, it was Wheaties or Kellogg's. It was one of those deals where they, are going to support a movie. My job is to get the movie done. And my job is to protect it and make it as good as we can. Another situation happened with Goldie Hawn. I mean, I think it was definitely Christmas Eve. And so I think it was a week before the start of principal photography on a movie called The First Wives Club. And Goldie called Scott Rudin and said, honey, the producer, I can't do the movie. I've reread the script, I'm bowing out. So he's a very strong producer. He tried to convince her, and he called me. And I got her on the phone, and she's a friend. And I tried to cajole her, and I tried very hard to convince her why she had to do this movie. And then I said, Goldie, I give up. I have only 2 words for you, Kim Basinger. And Kim Basinger was an actress who had walked out of a movie, and they took everything she had away from her because they were going to lose $12 million, the entire cost of the movie. We would have lost $20 million, whatever the movie cost, because it was all tied to Goldie, Bet, and Diane Keaton. And if one dropped out, everybody dropped out, and you couldn't replace it. And she said to me, I can't believe you said that. And my husband was in the other room because it was Christmas Eve. And when I got off the phone, he said, I can't believe you said that. And I said, what do you want me to do? I said, she's going to walk off the movie. It's a great script. Clearly she's having anxiety that has nothing to do with the movie. And I understand that anxiety. She's an actress. And it's scary, you know, and it's a very brave part and a very bold part. What do you want me to do? And sure enough, I'm sure people talk to her who are agents. I think Jeff Berg is quoted in saying, we explained to her that she couldn't walk off. Monday, she shows up at the movie. She calls me at 5:30, and she says, honey, what was wrong with me? What was I thinking? This is the most fun I'm ever having. I mean, she said, and of course, she was brilliant in the movie. And what Stephen doesn't write in the book, and this is one of the things I don't like about the book, is he leaves us with Kim Basinger, and he never says that Goldie and I are still friends to this day, and we laugh about it. She said, this could have really ruined our friendship. I said, yes, it could have, but look at how good it turned out. First Wives Club is so great. And Mike Myers and I worked together on Stand Up to Cancer, and he's fantastic. So, look, you all know this. You don't have a choice. And after trying to be polite, and after trying to cajole someone, and after trying to be rational, sometimes you have to have I don't know what you call it, a steel hammer, whatever you want to call it, in order to get the job done. And my obligation when I was running the studio was to make the best movies I could ever make, and to also make commercial movies. And that tug of war is a difficult tug of war, because some movies that you love more than anything aren't necessarily commercial, and some commercial movies maybe you don't love as much, you know. But you have to do everything you can to protect the movie. You have to do everything you can to protect the bottom line. And you have to have integrity at the same time. So it's not like you're going to lie or be immoral or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. But these just go with the territory.
How did you react when people lied to you?
I have to say, I have no problem with anybody that is tough or that raises their voice or that uses swear words or whatever you want to say. I have no problem with that. But I have enormous problems with people that lie or that are disloyal. And unless, and I can't think of an instance where this would be true, unless I can really figure it out, that usually is the end of the relationship. There have been exceptions where people didn't tell you something because they couldn't. That I can forgive, and you know that's understandable. But blatantly, I mean, you said sometimes people would come in and just blatantly lie to you, and that was like bad.
Let's talk about a relationship you had. You mentioned Scott Rudin, really the most brilliant producer
Without
maybe
a doubt.
alive, but not always the most straightforward. Let's say that was an incredibly successful race. You made many films together. You mentioned First Wives Club, The Hours, The Truman Show. How do you, as an executive, navigate the relationship with a brilliant and opinionated producer? So
I respected his brilliance, and I respected his opinions, and I respected his passion. And there's a great story in the book, which is actually Stephen's favorite story.
It is my favorite story in the book, yes.
So we made a movie called The Truman Show, and this shows you, I think, the Hollywood culture, but it also shows you my sickness, maybe, I don't know. So there was an actor who was supposed to do the part, and he couldn't remember his lines, and so he had to be let go. And so then the director says, I'll do the part. And I said, what? You're a director. I said, no. So that was stopped at the pass. And then we had the opportunity to have Ed Harris. But Scott wanted Alan Arkin, who I think is a brilliant actor. I want to be clear about that, but I thought Ed Harris was better. I said, no, I want Ed Harris. And as a studio head, you have that ability. And I was translating this information not only to Scott, but to the executive in charge, a woman named Michelle Manning, who was a fantastic executive. And we all wanted Ed Harris. And if you saw the movie, at least we can say we were right, but we are wrong as much as we're right. But this time we were right. So suddenly, Michelle starts getting these calls. Marty Scorsese on one. Marty says, how can you not give the part to Alan Arkin? Steven Spielberg on two. How can you not give the part to Alan Arkin? And she's like saying this to me. I said, just don't pay any attention. We're going. Then she gets this letter. And the letter says, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I am a respected actor. I have worked my whole life. This is the part that I've wanted to do forever. You are destroying me. I am almost suicidal that you're not giving me this part. Why do you hate me so much? What have I done to offend you? And she looks at it and signed Alan Arkin. Yeah. Signed Alan Arkin. And she's like, first, like devastated. But before she calls me to tell me this terrible thing, how can we ruin this man's life? She starts to look at the letter. And she starts to look at the writing. And she realizes it's Scott Rudin writing in the left hand. Now, I'm so sick that I respected his passion. And I said, look at him, he's fighting for what he believes. I think that's really cool. So it didn't bother me at all. I laughed. I said, Scott, good try. We're going with Ed Harris. But it's like so you ask how I navigated it. I love people who will do anything. That was wrong, but I thought it was funny. But I love people who will do anything for what they believe. You know, there was a director, Gary Fleeter, who I adore, and we were doing some reshoots on his movie, and he wanted this one shot, and, you know, I said, no, we don't need that shot. I'm really sorry. And he said, but it's such an important shot. I said, Gary, you know, we don't need it. This is the budget, blah, 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 blah. On Monday, they shot. On Monday, Fred Gallo comes marching into my office. He's the head of production. He said, we have to fire Gary Fleeter. I said, why? What did he do? He did the shoot. He said, yes, he did the shoot. And then on his own credit card, he bought cars and he shot the shot that we told him he couldn't shoot. I said, pretty clever, on his own credit card. He paid for it. What are you upset for? He said, we don't have insurance for that. I said, did anyone get hurt? He said, no. I said, forget it. He said, no, you can't forget it. You have to call him in and you have to yell at him. So I called him in. And I almost couldn't keep a straight face. I said, you really wanted that shot, didn't you? He said, yes, and it's going to be in the movie. I said, it's fine with me. I said, look, I'm supposed to yell at you, but actually, I admire your passion. He said, I knew you would because you're married to Billy Friedkin. He would have done the same thing. That's my husband, and he would have done the same thing. So if you admire their passion, and that's it. And, you know, it's a world of passionate people. You see that every day in all of your businesses. People who really care about what they're doing, that will do whatever they can to achieve it. As long as it's in the realm of morality, I'm kind of cool with it. And I loved Gary Fleeter for that, if you want to know the truth. And I kind of love Scott Rudin for that too, even though, you know, it's a complicated relationship. I think he's one of the
book outlines it, and it certainly the end of the relationship was very complicated.
But there is no end. See, the relationship continues as a friendship forever. But didn't put that in the book.
Yeah, I said to Sherry when I started the book, you know, there are going to be 5 or 6 things that you really don't like in this book. And at one point she said to me, you said they're going to be, well, deep into the interviews, you said there are going to be 5 or 6 things. We're already up to 7 or 8, you know. I want to ask one more thing, then we'll take just a few questions, if anybody has any. 2003, without telling anybody in the studio, you set out on a secret journey, the beginning of the end. Where did you go, and what was the purpose of that journey?
So, I have admired Jimmy Carter for his post-presidency more than anybody. And I admired him because though he had held the biggest job in the world, and I thought he was a good president, in my mind, his selfless devotion to health issues, to Habitat for Humanity, to everything, there was no one else who I saw had done that so purely. And at that time, I was having what I think is quite normal, actually, kind of questioning. I had been doing the job for a long time. I had made hundreds of movies. I was watching my behavior. I was starting to get involved in a lot of other things that didn't have to do with movies, but were more philanthropic. And I found myself wanting to be at that meeting on cancer research more than at the script meeting. And I started to notice that it wasn't like I had a lack of passion, but my passion was moving someplace else. And I was in my early, well, by the time I went to see Carter, I was in my mid-50s, I think. And I started to really realize that I wanted to leave my job. And I wanted to have a whole new life. And I'd always said to myself, really since I was young, that if I was able to be successful enough to have my dreams come true, and I fortunately was, that I wanted to give back. And I knew that I wanted to give back in the area of cancer research because my mother had died of cancer. And I knew that I wanted to give back in the area of education because I'm a former math teacher. And so the causes found me, I didn't find them, and they all came from my heart. And they're like making little movies, the projects that you're involved in. But I wasn't sure I had the guts, and I wasn't sure how to do it. And so I knew somebody who knew President Carter, and they asked me if I wanted to meet him. And I said, that would be the greatest honor of my life. And so I set off to Atlanta to have a meeting with President Carter. And I remember the night before calling my husband, and I remember saying to him, this may be the dumbest thing I've done. I flew across country, I've told nobody, to meet my hero. I'll be in there for 5 minutes. I have nothing to say to him. Billy said, talk about the Middle East. I said, you think between now and the morning I could have enough intelligent questions about the Middle East? I don't know anything to talk about. And he kept saying, no, just relax. I said, relax. I mean, what am I going to say to him? I'm going to say, hi, it's nice to meet you. He's going to say, it's nice to meet you. I'm going to say, it's an honor to meet you. He's going to say, it's really a pleasure to meet you. And then I'm going to leave. I mean, this will be the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. And he said, just relax. It'll be okay. And I walked in to President Carter's office, and I can remember this so clearly. He was looking out the window. There's gardens at the Carter Center. And he turned around, and he had this enormous smile, and he had this twinkle in his eyes that made you feel instantly comfortable. And he said, it's really nice to meet you. Let's sit down and talk. And about 4.5 hours later, I left. I mean, he is the most engaging person. And he does this thing, which is, someone said, what did you talk about? And I started to think. And then I started to laugh because all he did was ask me questions about myself. So that is the most engaging thing you can do to anybody in the whole world. And it was then that I started talking to him about how I felt as if I was repeating myself in my job. I felt as if the highs weren't as high, the lows weren't as low, that I wanted to change. And what advice would he give me? And he said that change is great, that you just have to leap. You have to do it. You'll be busier than you've ever been in your whole life because there's so many things out there that you can do. And I left knowing that I would leave. And I think I left two years later or something like that. And so at that time I started to plan my leaving. I started to go to more meetings on cancer research. I became a regent.
Of the University of California.
The University of California. I started to learn about stem cells. I started to learn about the things that interested me. If my mother had died of Parkinson's, I'd be involved in Parkinson's. I mean, every cause is worthwhile. And I determined that I wouldn't turn 60 in the job. I told John Dolgen I was going to leave. No one believed me, but I told everyone. And somebody said to me, you have to stop telling people that. I said, why? It's the truth, you know. And sure enough, I left. I remember resigned before Thanksgiving because I wanted one Thanksgiving where I didn't have to be in the room all day, you know, reading 10 scripts on Thanksgiving Day. And then I had to stay for about 6 months till they found my replacement. But the great thing is, the day that I walked out the door, I loved my time in the movie business. I felt total joy. I didn't have any trouble with the transition. I knew what I wanted to do. I am busier than I've ever been. I felt like someone who was graduating college, where everything was new. I didn't know anything, so scientists had to draw pictures to explain things to me. I was visiting the same schools that I used to teach in, and sadly, they were still needing help. I have a wonderful person running our foundation who I don't think is here today, but I felt more alive, more authentic, and joyous. And also, another reason that I wanted to leave, which I think is really important, it kind of brings us full circle, was I chose 60 because 60, you're still young enough to have a lot of years left, but you're not so young that you can wait. And I had a joyous 12 years. I have a wonderful husband. I have wonderful kids, but I missed a lot too. Do you know? And I don't regret any of that, but I wanted a different quality of life. I wanted to be able to go on a vacation and stay an extra day just because I liked it and not have to rush back for a board meeting and not be on the phone for 5 hours a day while I was on vacation. I wanted to have lunch with a girlfriend just for fun. I wanted to have dinners with friends just because I liked them. And I didn't want to miss that. And I wanted, most important, unrestricted time with my kids, unrestricted time with my husband. And I didn't want to die at my desk. And I guess in all honesty, because my mother died at 64 and my father at 42, I guess I didn't think I was going to make it to 70. I'm 72, and I now think I'm going to make it to 100. So there. And I'm going to have, honestly, the happiest time in my life. And
then in 25 years, you can do the sequel, and you can be anxious again. You know. Do we have time for questions? No? We can't take a couple of questions? I can't hear you. Okay, 2 questions. Yes, sir.
Can you describe in greater detail your relationship with John Dolgen at Paramount? Because he seems like the tough guy, and all your friends think you're the nicest, sweetest, kindest person in the world. How did that really work?
John Dolgen was the co-head of Paramount, a brilliant business affairs executive who worked with Sherry for most of her time at the studio.
Well, I really thank you for asking that, because John Dolgen is, first of all, a genius. And John Dolgen technically was my boss, but as he always used to say, you show me no respect, kiddingly. And he treated me as if I was his partner. And I think of him as my brother. I mean, and that's really what I would have to say. So John Dolgen was responsible for the television and the parks and Simon & Schuster and everything, including the movie division. John Dolgen is creative, but his love is financial. So we were partners because though I know how to do the numbers, because I was a math teacher, I have no interest in them whatsoever. And John's interest was at that. So we became true partners. And what happened is that John used to always say, we have this long financial meeting, and it's going to be 4 hours. And like clockwork, I'd have my secretary call 15, 20 minutes into the meeting and say, so-and-so's walking off the set, you have to leave. And John would laugh. And once I was there for 22 minutes, he said, longer than usual, Sherry, before you make up this excuse. And I used to say, why do I have to be there? You know all of this, and I trust you with my life. I trusted John with my life. He's one of the most extraordinary partners anyone could ever have. And he is one of my best friends to this day. John is decisive, he's brilliant. If you're off by $1, he finds that dollar. So I rested easy knowing that all of our numbers were good. We had an unprecedented kind of success because of John, not just because of the movies, but because John was such a financial genius and knew how to prepare for, every studio has a downtime, an uptime, whatever. And so what I think Mark is asking is he has this reputation for being a tough guy. John Dolgen often raises his voice. That's a style. That doesn't mean he's tough. That's passionate. That's the way he expresses his emotion. Once you knew that, you didn't even hear it. Sometimes I start to laugh. I go, oh, you're getting so upset about this. And he'd say, don't laugh at me. And I go like that. Underneath it all, John Dolgen, and this is an expression that I use, is a mush face. He is the kindest, most decent, most loving, most protective person in the whole world, and has the highest ethical standards, the greatest integrity. I could not have done my job at Paramount without John Dolgen. I would not be where I am today without John Dolgen. I love him like a brother. We travel together. I still see him every couple of weeks for lunch. But wait, I just have to say this, because I just want to clear this up. There is no better partner, and this is what I want to say. If you have a partner, and if you are in the job that I'm in, if you have to protect your back, and if you're fearful, you cannot do your job because you cannot take risks. I never worried about protecting my back because John and I were just joined at the hip. I can't speak higher of anyone.
No, they're telling us to wrap.
Oh,
if you want to meet Sherry, we're signing some books. The book is like a roller coaster ride. You will be astonished at her life. We're going to the pavilion, and then you can come and say hello. Is that right? You're going to show us the way. So you can follow us or not follow us, but
thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. It was such a pleasure.